Okay, so I guess we're live. So fantastic. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name's Adam Henry. I'm Director of Customer Solutions at E2open, and I will be doing a short presentation to you today. So let me first share my screen. I'm also going to turn my camera off because I do live in the middle of nowhere in Shropshire in the UK, and my internet connection is definitely not the best. So let me just make sure we don't have any performance issues. So if we turn the camera off and then we share the screen. Excellent. So bold assumption that everyone can see my screen and we can make a start. So great. So again, thank you. Hello, everyone. So um, today I'm going to be taking you through the unlock the full potential of your integrated business planning capabilities with the aid of a network. Now, just one thing, unfortunately, due to, I guess, a typical supply chain disruption, Nari won't be able to join us today, so apologies for that, but hopefully I can step into his rather large shoes and present something that is both interesting and informative. So, what do we mean by network-enabled integrated business planning? The fundamental goal of IBP is to balance demand and supply in the most profitable way. And I think there's no one who's listening to this who doesn't understand that fundamental principle. However, we've got a slightly different approach because what we believe is profitable to a brand owner is not necessarily the same for their suppliers and maybe not even the same for their customers. We need to replace the narrow focus of enterprise profit with a shared value across ecosystems based on balancing the total network demand and the total network supply. So today, what I'm going to do is make the case that in order to reach true success within integrated business planning, a network is needed. So how are we going to do that? First, we will discuss the key business challenges that companies and their partners go through today, focusing specifically on the growing nature of outsourcing and the various disruptions that we are seeing in today's climate. Then we will discuss the challenges of current planning systems and why they are inadequate in order to support what we're trying to achieve. We will then go through what success looks like. How will you recognize success when you see it? And we will detail the various enablers of this successful state, exactly what is required to get to the destination of your journey. And since the enablers for reaching success are all provided by a supply chain business network, we will prove that a network is an imperative to deliver truly integrated business planning. So to start with, what are the challenges that companies are facing in today's global climate? Well, the big issue is that supply chains are inherently multi-enterprise and vastly more complex than this simple diagram suggests. First, if you think about the brand owner, they need to manage demand in an omni-channel environment. We need to understand all of the different routes to market. And these include things like the retail channel, online, direct, and then typically quite a complex multi-tier distribution consisting of distributors and various types of reseller. In addition to this, we need to control increased supply variability and escalating material costs, again, in a very deep, extended, and complex multi-tier environment. And these are real challenges that are happening now. You may have seen in the news recently that a major CPG customer announced that they're going to increase prices due to increased commodity costs, and they're not the only ones who are going to be doing so. So these challenges are very real and very current. We also must address fulfillment challenges and meets the ever-increasing demands of the customers that are now living in an Amazon world where their expectations have been set very high. And we also mustn't forget the physical movement of product. That cannot be ignored. Not just the pure logistics side, but all of the challenges involved with complex international trade within a shifting landscape. So the problems that we tend to see because of this complexity, lost sales due to poor forecast, poor customer service levels, and on the supply side, wrong sized inventory, either not enough or too much, and excessive supply chain costs. And these are all things that I'm sure you're very familiar with. But a key component of integrated business planning is effective collaboration. It's really a fundamental requirement. But here, what we're talking about is not just single tier collaboration. Multi-tier collaboration is essential. If we take traditional collaboration here in inverted commas, just because an issue is resolved between you and your tier one supplier, how do you know if you've either created or exacerbated issues for tier two and tier three? Another impact of all of this is that we often see large planning teams spread across the network that are working in silos. Most solutions only talk about integrating functions in a single enterprise. We see this as a much broader multi-enterprise business process. So the companies have complex global value chains. The end-to-end supply chains for companies is extremely elongated and global today. But just so we're clear on what we mean by end-to-end, we are talking about all the way from our tier N customers right the way through to our tier N suppliers. If you think about it, anything else really isn't true end-to-end, and it would be wrong to claim so. So within this, as we've mentioned before, significant outsourcing is here to stay. In fact, in the channel ecosystem, which includes direct customers, retailers, warehouses, and distributors, around 75% is outsourced in terms of activity. For the supply ecosystem portion, it's actually a whopping 85%. And when it comes to logistics, again, it's very timely with a lot of visibility and discussion happening in the media right now. Logistics is highly outsourced, along with the global trade aspects associated with that. But so what? So what? What is the impact of this amount of outsourcing? The crux of the challenge that we face is that the majority of disruptions to plans happen outside of internal operations. And we need to know that. We need visibility of that. We need to understand that. For example, what is happening in the channel that will impact ability to serve? What is the true customer demand? And how is that shifting over time? Within our supplier ecosystem, do the suppliers have the capacity and the capability in order to meet those demands? And do they in the short term, and do they in the long term? And in extreme examples, are they going to be around to do so in the long term? Then within the logistics ecosystem, where is my stuff? And what are the impacts to delays of that stuff? I really need to understand the reality of where my physical product is. And then there's the global trade management ecosystem, which is very much around negotiating the extreme complexities of international trade. If we think about, again, a very recent example around Brexit at the start of the year, there was more than enough examples of where delays were having serious impacts to product moving to the UK once it had left the EU. But fundamentally, we're dealing with a data problem. The goal of planning is to make decisions, but how can those decisions be made if we are running blind? And the reality is that running blind is no longer seen as an acceptable risk. If you're not considering all of this as part of your integrated business planning process, are you really performing it? And frankly, without the network, it really isn't possible to do that. So just a few more examples to put into context some of these disruptions. If you think about what we've seen recently with the global semiconductor shortage that has been caused in part by the global pandemic, along with an increase in the number of applications they are used for. More recently, the Suez Canal is another example of an event that, well, not many people predicted, but certainly everyone felt. More than 300 vessels were waiting to pass through the canal by the time the Ever Given was freed, and that's just the immediate delays. And there's more. So we are now seeing significant global resin shortages. The number of products and variety of products that this is affecting is significant, and it goes without saying that there has been an uptick in demand for personal protective equipment. It's the same with lumber, with the industry unable to flex anywhere near quickly enough to cope with the surge in demand, juxtaposed with the various supply challenges. Although it may be not the case that the shortage is a disaster for everyone, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are benefiting from the price surge. So what do these disruptions happening outside of our internal operations mean to those of us trying to plan and manage our supply chains? Well, certainly from a personal point of view, I was stung at the start of the year because I had to order a new desktop PC for video editing for my fiance. The particular graphics card I wanted was out of stock, so I had to pay for a more expensive one. And this combined with the price hike meant I got stung twice. So not a great personal story, but my fiance is happy, so that's all that matters, right? But anyway, the real problem is that we are often only made aware of the consequences of these issues well after the fact. If you think about the global semiconductor shortage, it didn't happen overnight. It really should have been possible to react to some of the early warning signals. It would also allow us to better coordinate with other suppliers to reduce the impact of some of these bottlenecks. I think a lot of people would be aware of the real challenges that we saw in automotive, where that was one of the primary reasons why we actually saw production lines in major manufacturers stop. But that's only part of the story. What about all the other product and all the other dependencies on that, and all the other inbound materials that were due to be consumed by production that of course they're being stored somewhere, they're driving up costs in the supply chain somewhere, and clearly the impact of the semiconductors is very far reaching. And we don't know what we don't know. So if you take the Suez Canal example, what was on the impacted vessels? Are there things deep within our supply ecosystem that we are just unaware of? No doubt there was some resin and some of those vessels. How far into our supply ecosystem would we have to go to be able to actually quantify those effects? And how long before the longer term impacts are fully resolved? So what does this all mean in terms of integrated business planning, and what are the problems with it? The challenge is that so much of what we do is assumptions driven planning. We are creating a forecast that is many steps removed from the end customer. There is an inability to differentiate one-off events with more permanent shifts in the market. If you think back to about this time last year at the start of the global pandemic, when we saw those huge spikes in toilet paper and hand sanitizer, we need to determine whether it's a true spike or sorry, a short-term spike or a true long-term uplift in demand. But do we have all the information we need to adjust our plans? Are we trying to satisfy a genuine supply shortage, or is there actually a reasonable amount of inventory within our demand ecosystem, but it's just in the wrong place? If we can't see it, we don't know. We can't answer that question. We also tend to assume that the forecast is going to be wrong. That's a very, very standard saying, but what does that mean? Well, we fill our warehouses with inventory to offset the risk. That may solve one problem, but it clearly creates a host of others. On the supply side, are we assuming that suppliers are going to deliver on time and are going to meet their stated lead times? Are we hoping that there will be no issues with the transportation routes used to ship product to and from our facilities? Plans are actually being created where supplier performance could be well below 80%. And that's before we even factor in logistics performance. And then there's the longer term supply issue. Are we basing our assumptions on our suppliers' stated or contractual capacity, or we actually consider their current capability? What if they are experienced issues with machines, with labor, with component availability? How is that impacting their ability to deliver our requirements? And why don't we have visibility of that? And then there's the inability to accurately judge the onset, duration, and the size of disruptions. Again, back to the Suez Canal example, do we fully understand both the short-term and the long-term ramifications? And not only is the challenge around assumptions-based planning, but this is all built upon typically outdated IT architecture. It invariably means that it's impossible to get access to good information in a timely manner. If the data required exists in several disparate systems, there is typically, at the very least, latency, and that's assuming that the systems are even connected properly and that the data is suitably harmonized between them. Then there's the effort and the cost needed to maintain and connect all these systems, and that's long before we talk about the tools or having the tools to properly leverage that data. How many organizations are still running on spreadsheets which are fed by a download from a system that is in interface snapshot from another system that was taken at the end of the previous week, and it's now already Tuesday? The overall result is a lack of both agility and resiliency, where you will be delivering performance and results that are far from optimal. So, with all that said, what is the end state? What are we trying to get to? Number of things. First, we want to get or calculate forecasts that are as close to the end customer as possible. We want to be able to create supply plans that are based on real data, not assumptions. We need visibility into multiple tiers within our channel so that we have a holistic and accurate view of what stock is actually out there. We need visibility into multiple tiers of suppliers to understand their current on-time performance, as well as the impact of any issues that they may be seeing. And we also need visibility into the logistics and global trade processes to ensure that disruptions don't impact our plans. In summary, I need to know what is happening across the entire supply chain, my customer's customer and my supplier's supplier. We will never have an IBP process that totally eliminates assumptions completely. We cannot see the future, but we should be able to dramatically reduce the ratio of assumptions versus things that we know for certain. The best algorithms and supply chain planning processes in the world will only be as good as the data on which they are based. How much of what I'm doing is based on latent, error-strewn, wrong, or simply non-existent data? So what is needed to reach that end state? Well, as we've mentioned, we need point of sales data and we need channel inventory data, and it needs to be up to date so that we can identify true customer demand. We also need an accurate picture of inventory across the whole enterprise and beyond, not just within our four walls. We need the ability to correlate multiple sources of supply chain data to perform risk assessment of disruptions. And we need the ability to shape demand in case of supply constraints. So what do we mean by that? Well, there'll never be a time when we can satisfy all the demand that we see. So we need to be able to have early sight of that. We need to be able to coordinate, and then we need to be able to shape what the customer wants. How do we shape? How do we influence? How do we mitigate the times when we have less supply than demand? And also we need to automate a lot of these business decisions. If you think about the data that we're talking about here, we're talking about millions and millions of data points where you are unable to collate and make sense of that information without the right systems in place. And you ultimately need the systems to support you in your decision-making process, weighing up massive amounts of data in order to come to the right conclusions. There are companies that can do this. We have CPG enterprises with the visibility within their demand ecosystem from point of manufacture to the final demand of the end customer, where they have access to EPOS data, channel inventory, and also a number of additional factors that contribute to the forecast, influence the demand, and allow us to derive a clean statistical customer demand forecast. We also have high tech enterprises that have total visibility across their multi-tier supply ecosystems so that they can control and effectively orchestrate their supply chain. However, the majority of companies are clearly a long way away from these models, being multi-enterprise with broad and deep demand and supply ecosystems. When this is combined with other challenges such as product proliferation, this means that the complexity they are trying to manage is impossible without the right data at the right time, and also impossible to manage without the tools to plan and execute effectively using that data. So, how does a network help solve and manage supply chain disruptions and ultimately orchestrate your supply chain better? Well, the network is a cost effective way of connecting to channel partners and retailers to get high frequency demand data. It supports the quick onboarding of trading partners, and it provides visibility into multiple tiers of suppliers at scale. And we're talking thousands of suppliers to perform proactive risk management. So, in terms of a practical walkthrough, we have our forecast. The forecast is then translated into a requirements plan that is handed over to our suppliers. Our suppliers then, through a multi-tier network, share that information through their supply base, and all of the tiers can come back and confirm that they're able to meet that demand. If they can, great. If they can't, if there are gaps, of course, that information is communicated back to the brand owner, and the brand owner can therefore adjust their plans accordingly and try and shape their channel responses. The network also ensures that our plans are aligned and adjusted to reality. Perfect plans are just that. They need to flex and adapt where required. And again, we have numerous examples of where it's so important that we have the latest up-to-date information when things go awry. It facilitates governance over the entire end-to-end supply chain management process. After all, what is the point of, for example, control towers when they are limited by the four walls of your enterprise? What is a control tower without the right information to feed it? It enables collaboration and helps ensure engagement among different business partners through mutually beneficial relationships. And if you think about potentially some of the relationships with either your customers or your suppliers, I dare say that some of them are less than perfect, maybe even sometimes adversarial and combative, which is not a win-win situation for anyone. And ultimately, that type of siloed behavior is going to, again, drive up costs for everyone and not allow you to meet your service targets. Ultimately, the business network delivers data-driven, integrated business planning that is predictive, prescriptive. It can support near autonomous planning and execution, and will consistently deliver optimal results for your business and all the customers that you serve. So thank you for listening to that short presentation today. Hope some of you found it useful and interesting. Of course, myself and a few of my colleagues will be available throughout the rest of the day to chat about this, anything you've seen today, or anything else connected to today's event. So looking forward to seeing some of you throughout the day. And once again, thank you very much for your time.